for River Network, however, which is based out of Portland, Oregon. It is a national conservation and environmental group that is not in Washington, D.C. We are a technical assistance group really focused on assisting local river and watershed groups in the field as much as possible. And a number of years ago, some of them came to the National River Rally and were very interested in climate change. Probably over a quarter of the people at our conference all wanted to cram into one session at one time. And the session was, what can watershed groups do about climate change? So my program was started in response to that need, and we've been focusing primarily on water conservation programs and things that can contribute to both mitigating climate change and adapting to climate change at the same time. And of course, now that we are in a drought year, water conservation is really big on everybody's agenda. It's time to cut back all across the board, right? And, you know, you get to have the fight with your spouse about how do we kill the lawn? Do we do it in one fell swoop, or do we just slowly starve it over the summer? People are doing this over at least 50% of the country this year. And it's a perfect time for us to look at the various sectors of water use and how should they be cutting back. And this enters into sort of the murky world of what we call the water energy nexus, a very abstract concept that is sort of value-free. It's not good or it's not bad. It's just the nexus. And the concept in my mind, it's been described as a vicious cycle wherein more water use leads to more energy use, which leads to more water use, and an unsustainable cycle. And I've really seen it kind of as the double helix, and with yellow for energy and blue for water, and we're looking for the little green wedges that can help break those bonds between energy use and water use. And there could be 100 things on my list of things that are nexus positive actions. And there's probably just as many things that are nexus negative actions. And one of the most important ones is just professional silos and people not seeing the opportunities and not seeing how their world impacts the other world. I'm a water person. I'm coming at this from what are the impacts to the rivers, but energy people are coming at it from a very different place. So getting out of those silos is a really important step for us to look to find the nexus positive actions. It really took the California Energy Commission wading into the water intensity of, the energy intensity of water supplies in California to first describe how the water nexus is working in the municipal water systems. The California Energy Commission had been looking for options to save energy through traditional water or energy conservation programs, and when they researched the embedded energy in California's water supplies, they realized that they could have water conservation programs that would actually save as much energy as direct energy conservation programs would at 2/3 of the cost. So from our perspective, on this chart you see source coming in on the upper left. That's a river. Flows into a community. The community uses it. There's energy added both at the supply and conveyance point and then at every other point along the cycle. In California, of course, you can either have water that's coming straight from the mountains or water that's coming through the State Water Project and being pumped over mountain ranges. It's very high energy intensity. So the source at the bottom of this chart is also the river. So I want to kind of look at even beyond the municipal water system at what happens to the river, the water in the river as it moves on to another use sector. If we take what we learn in California and apply it to the rest of the country on water supplies, we see that the carbon footprint of water use is equivalent to over 13% of all of the electrical production in the U.S. And this is obviously, it's hard for people to understand. Really, how can water use save energy? And a lot of it is in those residential water supply systems, wastewater treatment, but also a lot of it is in water heating. The majority of it is actually in hot water, because that's where most of the energy goes, and the largest opportunity for reducing the carbon footprint of water. So we came out with, River Network came out with this figure a couple of years ago, 13% of U.S. Grid, and that kind of has started a lot of conversations about how to address the water energy nexus across the country. And getting out of our silos a little more, we really see that the next issue in the water energy world is that climate change is coming, and it's changing how our communities are going to be using water, how much they value it. Over 2/3 of the counties across the nation are going to be experiencing some level of climate stress probably in the next 38 years, between now and 2050. And this is an NRDC Tetra Tech study that was done. And the lessons that we've been learning through our water energy work is that thirsty cities are going to need more energy to heat, treat, and move their water. And then when we get into drought cycles, the demand for that energy is going to go up even more, and that will end up using more water and pushing us into conflict with the electric sector, the thermoelectric sector. USGS, you guys are not surprised to see that thermoelectric sector is a huge user of water probably, but 53% of all fresh surface water withdrawals go to thermoelectricity in the last USGS report. It was the only sector that was growing in per capita use, and is greater than all of the water that we're using in municipal use, and equivalent to or greater than agriculture, depending on how you want to look at some of these numbers. The scary stuff is that doesn't even include hydropower. And so when we add hydropower to that, way more than half of our surface water, our fresh water, is going to electric production in some way. So Union of Concerned Scientists they looked at the EIA numbers that were reported from the power companies to the federal government on how much water they're using. They found that the numbers really don't add up. The system is not effective at really monitoring how much water is being used. Reports that come in a year later that don't even include many facilities because of exemptions and inconsistencies in the regulations make it really hard to know how much water is being used. So Union of Concerned Scientists came out with these ranges of water intensity for various thermoelectric sources, which I felt was really unsatisfying because I want one number per fuel source. I want to be able to tell, what's good and what's bad. We know in the water energy world that renewables save water. We've heard that for a number of years now, since about 2003, when the Department of Energy came out with a report that said that if we converted to wind and solar, we could save vast amounts of water, I think, because this is a chart that goes up, right? So that must be a vast amount of water. This is the real problem in the water energy world, is nobody understands each other's numbers or figures. If you are a water person, you don't probably know a whole lot about the difference between a kilowatt hour and a megawatt hour. If you're an energy person, you probably don't know the difference between saving water associated with withdrawals or saving water associated with consumption. And who says we can even save water? There's only so much water on the planet, and there always has been. So people get very lost in these numbers, really don't understand the scope or magnitude of the water footprint of electricity. So, I'm a water person. I put together, I usually do teacups, in the water world, but I'm now introducing water balloons to to all of you. You will now have a new way of looking at the world, and that is water balloons with no numbers in them, because we really aren't agreeing yet on how to measure the water footprint of any electrical source. Public water, this is roughly to scale, public water supply being far less water than that is used to produce electricity, except the solar and the wind balloons should be so tiny you can barely see them. And I have some rough ideas about how much money, or water, it's not money, but it should be in each of these, but it would be very hard for us to come to a general agreement on that. If we did have a sense of exactly what the numbers were, then we could have a conversation of how that should change in the future, because really the future is here, and the Union of Concerned Scientists report found that there's already a number of watersheds across the country that are experiencing water stress because of the energy sector withdrawals conflicting with the water supply for other sectors. And we have no idea how bad the next drought is going to be or where the next blackout is going to be, because there's not enough water to support a thermoelectric plant. The media is very concerned and interested. They want to know where the next blackout is going to be, and it's really hard to say because we don't know what the future holds. What we do know, looking at these different types of energy sources from sort of the macro level, is that the water footprint of hydropower is the largest. It takes hundreds of thousands of gallons to make a megawatt hour of electricity. It's either sitting in a reservoir or in some other way impacted in that process. And even if you just look at consumption rather than water use, the typical number that's been given is 18,000 gallons per megawatt hour. Looking at just saying half of that is attributed to co-benefits at different facilities. You still have 9,000 gallons per megawatt hour that's actually consumed in making that energy. So what do we environmentalists want if we don't want dams? That's kind of what I set out to find in this report. And setting aside hydropower for a moment, the bubble on the right is cooling technologies, and that is a huge factor. That's one of the most important parts of reducing the water footprint of thermoelectricity, is looking at the technologies that are being used in the plant. Old plants, once through cooling systems, use a lot more water. Fastest growing water use sector is the energy sector, but there are some new parts of that are coming on, like hydrofracking is using even more water that isn't being reported consistently at this point. So many of the thermoelectric plants are going to experience more shutdowns as water intake temperatures increase. Braidwood, Illinois, Millstone, Connecticut, we're already starting to see that this year. In most cases, they end up getting exemptions and exceptions so that they can discharge warmer water or allow the plant to operate in a different way. So from the next few slides, I'm going to go through these sources, and each slide has two numbers on it, one for total water use, gallons per megawatt hour, and the other for consumption. I use water use rather than withdrawal because I'm trying to compare it to hydro. And we know that coal is the most water intensive on a life cycle basis of the other fuels that are being used in the thermoelectric realm. I say that not only because 40% of the coal plants are still using once through cooling, but also because when you put scrubbers on coal plants, the toxic chemicals, heavy metal discharges to the river increase. And then carbon capture and sequestration, as that comes online, will use 10 to 30% more water. So I rate water footprint of coal as the highest. The water footprint of natural gas may not be the highest at this point, but it's changing quickly, and the researchers are not keeping up with the technology, basically. Fracking, non-conventional gas and oil drilling are changing the water footprint of natural gas. Natural gas, and especially combined cycle facilities, use much less water on site than coal. But when a single wellhead needs 10 million gallons to produce the number of cubic feet may vary, and the number of BTUs in those cubic feet may vary. It's very hard to figure out the actual gallons per kilowatt hour, but the answer is lots more than conventional oil and gas drilling, and lots more methane and greenhouse gas impact from non-conventional oil and gas drilling. So we've been patting ourselves on the back lately that we've been reducing our carbon footprint in this country, and it is mostly because of laissez-faire energy policy. It's not really a policy. We've just been burning more natural gas, and it's impacting our water resources in ways that we don't fully understand yet. Nuclear power, of course, is also a lot of older once-through power plants. It is also not very well researched in terms of how the water footprint of nuclear energy is going to change in the future, what waste disposal we'll need in terms of water, and very high on-site water use because it's so hot and it requires more waste heat disposal than other thermoelectric technologies. PV, wind, and solar, I mentioned, have really, one great advantage. They won't turn off in a drought. And wind is essentially no on-site water requirements and the lowest water footprint for construction of power facilities. PV solar is in the same ballpark. Concentrated solar thermal is also a thermoelectric process, so there is water use there, and because of that, it's not being used as widely as PV solar. So I put all of these numbers together, come up with an average life cycle water footprint for each fuel type. This chart only applies for the year 2009 because I weighed each fuel type by the prevalence of cooling technologies in those facilities. Is this a benchmark? We can argue about what else should be included. This doesn't, like I said, have any water footprint associated with fracking or with nuclear waste disposal, or for that matter, for coal ash ponds or toxic discharges from coal plants. All of those things would add to the fossil fuels and nuclear, the bars here, in terms of what the real water footprint is of those. And the mix of energy sources in the grid that you actually get at your home also is going to include some amount of hydropower, all those other sources, and then hydropower. As I said, hydropower is a real outlier. Even to get it on the same chart with the other ones is difficult. Most of the water impact is thermal pollution, and but of course there's also fish barriers and many other impacts. It's worth a lot more discussion how we determine what a water footprint is. But I think that this conversation is just beginning, and we still don't know exactly what we want as conservationists and as water people. So I added up all of the fuel sources in our current grid and weighted a second time by the prevalence of each in the grid to come up with a benchmark number for the water footprint of electricity in the U.S. in 2009. It's essentially 42,000 gallons per megawatt hour, or 42 gallons per kilowatt hour. Is that a lot? That's the question. Is that a lot? How do we know if that's too much? we can compare it to average household use. I think it is a lot because compared to the residential household, just direct residential use, it's 5 times more. And a lot of that is in the hydroelectric sector, but there's still large pieces of that are thermoelectric. Again, it's still solar and wind is so small you don't even see it on the chart, essentially. And the real question is, do we have enough water for this? This is essentially like having each household in America fill up their bathtub 500 times a month to overflowing just to keep their the lights running and the electricity in their homes. And if there is a conflict between public water supply and energy use, what are we going to do about it? Our systems, people aren't seeing the solutions readily. So I was trying to look at, okay, how do we get more water if we need it? The clear choices are we need to conserve energy as well as conserving water directly. We need to review the management of existing dams. Even without talking about dam removals in this country, there are a lot of opportunities to improve the effectiveness of the dams we have and improve the management. Many of our dams don't even have a public process for reviewing that since they're federally owned. So that's 2 areas that many of our groups are working on. But then not looking at the dams. So next 3 bullets on this slide, this is really this is back of the envelope calculations. How can we find more water? What is the potential for water savings? Much as we came up with, well, the potential for energy savings in municipal water use is 13% of the electrical use. Just back of the envelope, if we reduced coal and natural gas in the grid and increased wind and solar to 40% of the grid, we could save essentially 60% of the thermoelectric portion of the water footprint of electricity and reduce consumptive use a little bit. Eliminating once-through cooling at all the plants, including nuclear power, would also reduce the thermoelectric portion by as much as 68%, but it would actually increase consumptive use since the coal plants in particular use more consumptively in hybrid and dry cooling modes. But if we did both, if we eliminated once-through cooling and increased the low water renewable options in our grid, I just, thought, okay, the latest reports I saw said we could go to 50% pretty easily. How about 40%? And my back-of-the-envelope calculation is you could reduce water use by 83% and consumption by 27%. At that point, you're getting some water that wouldn't be available other ways. So here are my little poor balloons. They're all, there's no numbers in them. We're trying to make them smaller. We're trying to increase what we might need for urban use. What's the potential for change? Just ballpark, if thermoelectric use is currently at 200 billion gallons a day, and we reduce it by 83%, there's a huge 166 billion gallons a day that would be available for use either in stream or as new water supplies or for farmers or however we want to start to have that discussion. It's much larger, more than 3 times as large as currently the withdrawals being used for public water supply. So what if something changed, some Nexus positive things changed? None of these things are being proposed right now, but here's some what-ifs that I think are possible. And if any of them happened, energy companies would be coming to the water monitoring community saying, we really need more monitoring on our facilities. if energy companies were required to actually report their energy return on the amount of water invested in that plant to regulators, or there was an opportunity cost associated with that water that actually went into integrated resource planning and least cost planning, that would change things. If there was a system of carbon tax or cap and trade and water was considered part of the strategies, that would change the situation. And we wouldn't be looking at these aggregate numbers from the Energy Information Administration. We'd be looking a lot more critically at individual facilities. So Nexus positive monitoring, I think in the meantime, before any of those Nexus positive actual policies occur, we could make some strides with how we look at stream conditions and report stream conditions and really develop some baseline information and track what's going on right now. Lots of very negative things are happening out there right now this year, especially with in-stream conditions. There's no final rules on the Clean Water Act 316A requirements, so there's still a lot of wiggle room about what is going to be required of energy producers. And we really need the monitoring to cover both quantity and quality, both temperature and toxins. Very few companies are doing that right now. And so many of the companies are getting extensions and exemptions on their MPDES permits that they have very little legal leverage to reduce. You know, we have little legal leverage to make them reduce water use, and there's a lot of proprietary information that is not being made available to the public. So I'm hoping that we can buy some time, look for some of these potential Nexus positive changes. Our overall recommendations in our report was that we need to change what we're burning and how we're doing it, that we need to level the playing field for environmental regulation of natural gas, which has so many exemptions and is in a not the same point in terms of scrutiny for environmental and water impacts. And we need to conserve the resources in as much an integrated way as possible. So I think that we need to be really in a position to evaluate changes as we go forward, to monitor changes and, you know, encourage companies when they're doing the right thing, encourage agencies that own hydropower projects to really look at the highest and best uses of the facilities we have, floodplain management, and develop some case studies that we can look at and show people that we have examples of how we've improved river conditions and public water supply through conserving water in the energy sector. And I'm hoping that we can get companies worried enough that they're calling you guys and saying we need more monitoring.